The crowd murmured as the final round of the Yale National Debate Championships was about to begin. The auditorium buzzed with tension, caffeine, and quiet calculation. Every seat was taken, and the stage lights were already warming the polished wood floor. Then she walked in. No entourage. No blazer adorned with a fancy prep school crest. Just a plain navy sweater, black jeans, and a calm, unreadable face. Some in the audience exchanged glances. Who's she? Where's she from? Does she even go to Yale? On the far side of the room, one of the finalists from an elite East Coast team leaned into his partner and whispered something. They both smirked. She noticed. But she didn't flinch. She made her way to the stage with slow, confident steps, clutching a single worn-out folder. No laptop. No printed statistics. No flashy speaking style. Just her, and a voice they hadn't heard yet. And in less than 30 minutes, that voice would silence an entire room. The moderator called the finalists' names. From Princeton, Dylan Mercer and Ava Klein. From Stanford, Raj Sethi and Lena Brooks. And finally, the moderator hesitated slightly, community representative, Naomi Fields. A soft wave of confusion rippled through the audience. Community representative? What did that even mean? The truth was, Naomi wasn't affiliated with any Ivy League school. She had qualified through an independent track open to public applicants, a little-known rule in the championship charter that had been around for years, but rarely used. It was designed for exceptional independent talent. Very few ever made it that far. Fewer still were taken seriously. But Naomi had not only qualified, she had outscored every other solo competitor in the preliminary rounds, beating teams from Harvard, MIT, and Columbia. Still, today was different. This wasn't the prelims. This was the finals. And the room, especially the judges, treated her like she'd somehow slipped through a crack in the system. Ava from Princeton tilted her head as Naomi took her seat. No notes, she asked politely, but with that sugary undertone that only trained ears caught. Naomi smiled. I prefer to think. The Stanford team didn't even look at her. The first motion was announced: this House would abolish diplomatic immunity for international political figures. A complex motion, loaded with legal nuance, global context, and centuries of precedent. The kind of motion where pedigree usually outweighed passion. Where trained debaters, with advisors and archival material, would shine. And yet, Naomi sat quietly, legs crossed, eyes steady. Her folder hadn't moved. Her opponents scribbled furiously. Teams whispered strategies. Pages rustled like wind in a dry forest. She said nothing. A few people in the back row chuckled. Maybe she froze. The timer clicked down. First round. Princeton was up. Ava stood. Her tone was polished. Her diction surgical. Her statistics on point. People clapped. Then Naomi stood. No podium. No notes. Just her. And the next 10 minutes would shift the entire atmosphere in the room, from casual dismissal to stunned, electric silence. Naomi stepped forward. Her movements were unhurried. She didn't clear her throat, didn't fidget, didn't fake a smile. She simply looked at the judges, then slowly turned to the audience. I'm not going to start with statistics, she began, her voice steady and smooth. Because everyone here already knows the numbers. I'm here to challenge the assumptions behind them. A hush fell over the auditorium. She didn't speak like a student. She spoke like someone who had lived through every argument she was about to present, not just rehearsed it. You can abolish diplomatic immunity. Sure. But what you're really doing is replacing an imperfect safeguard with the illusion of accountability. She walked a few steps across the stage. In the real world, political figures don't play by the rules you think they do. Strip away immunity, and they don't become more responsible, they become more elusive. Harder to prosecute. Better at hiding behind state power. The problem isn't protection, it's enforcement. The motion solves the wrong issue. Someone in the front row leaned forward. A professor, no doubt. Maybe even a judge. His eyes narrowed. Naomi continued. If this motion passes, we create a system where weaker states become vulnerable to legal manipulation, and powerful countries gain new tools to harass rivals under the guise of justice. She paused. Sound familiar? That line hit like a crack of thunder. The room was no longer listening politely. It was locked in. Naomi wasn't just offering a counterargument. She was reframing the debate. She was flipping it upside down, showing everyone that their polished talking points were built on fragile ground. She spoke without filler. No uhs, no likes. Just clean, calculated phrasing, as though every sentence had been rehearsed 100 times in her mind before it came out of her mouth. When her time was up, she nodded once and returned to her seat. No dramatic flourish. No glance at her opponents. Silence. Then a slow ripple of applause. It started with one of the younger judges. Then the second. Then the crowd followed. And in the back row, someone whispered, "Who is she?" Her opponents suddenly weren't smirking anymore. They were scanning their notes with growing panic, realizing they'd underestimated something they couldn't quite measure: clarity. Backstage, the Stanford team was visibly tense. Raj, usually unshakable, was flipping through their binder of prepped arguments so quickly the pages began to tear. Lena was staring at Naomi like she was trying to decipher a foreign language spoken perfectly. How the hell did she pivot like that? We didn't even think of the enforcement angle, Lena muttered under her breath. She's bluffing, Raj replied, but it didn't sound convincing. Back on stage, the next team presented. Their strategy was simple: bury Naomi's argument under an avalanche of legal history, obscure cases, and procedural complexity. If they couldn't win on strength, they'd win on confusion. Their delivery was crisp, but it lacked something: conviction. They were reacting now, not leading. Naomi, meanwhile, leaned back in her chair. Calm. Listening. Not writing. Not even blinking. The crowd was beginning to notice something unfamiliar in her presence: not arrogance, not even confidence. Command. She owned the space without trying to. And that unsettled people who were used to dominating rooms through volume, credentials, or charm. Her second round began with no fanfare. You just heard a great deal of information, she said, looking directly at the judges. But I want you to ask yourselves one question: how much of it applies in practice, rather than theory? The judges glanced at each other. That question, simple but sharp, cut through the fog. Debate isn't about who can throw out the most citations. It's about clarity, logic, truth. And here's the truth: if your solution doesn't work for countries without leverage, it doesn't work at all. She then gave a hypothetical scenario: a small country trying to hold a foreign diplomat accountable after a catastrophic incident. Naomi detailed how, without structural power or international leverage, that nation would still struggle to pursue justice, immunity or not. The room shifted. The hypothetical sounded like real life. In fact, it was real life. Naomi was referencing a case from 5 years earlier, not famous, not cited in legal textbooks, but one she had clearly researched deeply. She made eye contact with one of the Yale professors on the judging panel. The professor straightened in their seat. The moment ended with Naomi posing one final question: if justice only works for the powerful, can you really call it justice? The air felt heavier now. Not because of what was being said, but who was saying it, and how. Princeton and Stanford had been polished, correct, strategic. Naomi was something else entirely. She was undeniable. By the time she sat down, even her competitors had stopped whispering. They weren't strategizing anymore. They were surviving. By the third round, the atmosphere in the auditorium had completely changed. No more polite clapping. No more glances at phones. No more side conversations. All eyes were either on Naomi or darting nervously between her and the crumbling composure of the opposing teams. The Princeton team opened with a refined defense, strong delivery, sharp vocabulary, and an appeal to legal precedent. On any other day, it would have landed smoothly. But not today. Not after Naomi had reframed the foundation of the motion. Their words now felt like echoes from an older conversation, one the room had already moved past. Naomi stood for her final rebuttal, and this time, she didn't walk to the center of the stage. She just stood at the side. Still. Quiet. And then she said, "We're not just debating emotion. We're debating what fairness actually looks like, and who gets to define it." A few in the audience leaned forward unconsciously. That line didn't just hit the topic, it hit the people in the room. Naomi continued, slowly. "We talk about abolishing immunity as if it will suddenly fix the system. But broken tools don't build just outcomes. They build broken systems in disguise." She gestured toward the opposing teams, not aggressively, just openly. "My colleagues here have quoted court cases and treaties, and I respect that. But what they haven't done is prove how any of that changes reality on the ground for the countries, people, and families affected by diplomatic crimes." Then she paused. Longer than usual. And when she spoke again, her voice lowered, intimate. "I didn't come here to win applause. I came here because I believe ideas should earn their power, not inherit it." The audience was dead silent. That wasn't a debate tactic. That was a personal philosophy. And in that moment, everyone understood that Naomi wasn't just winning arguments, she was shifting the energy of the room itself. Her clarity wasn't just intellectual. It was emotional. Human. For the first time that night, one of the judges actually leaned forward with both elbows on the table, hands clasped in front of their mouth, the universal posture of someone reevaluating everything. By the time Naomi returned to her chair, her opponents weren't even pretending to stay composed. Their notes were disorganized. Their timing off. Their confidence, visibly draining. The final bell rang. The debate was over. But everyone in the auditorium knew, something remarkable had just happened. And it wasn't just the content. It was the presence. The unshakable poise of someone who had no institutional shield, no prestigious network, and yet had dominated a room full of them. The debate ended, but no one moved. For a few seconds, the room sat in suspended silence, like it was waiting for permission to exhale. Then, slowly, the moderator stepped forward to the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a 10-minute break as the judges deliberate." Polite applause followed, but it was hesitant, as if no one was sure how to clap after what just happened. The competitors stepped off the stage. Ava and Dylan from Princeton huddled in a corner, visibly shaken. Raj and Lena from Stanford were whispering too quickly, their calm, elite demeanor cracked. Naomi didn't huddle with anyone. She just walked alone, slowly, toward the edge of the room, took a paper cup of water, and sat down in an empty row of seats near the back. People stared at her as they passed. Some students from other schools nudged each other. "That's her. She's not even from a university, right? Where'd she learn to speak like that?" She didn't respond. Didn't look up. She just sat with her water, eyes closed, breathing evenly. The judges disappeared into the side conference room. The door shut behind them with a quiet click that felt louder than it should have. Back in the auditorium, the whispers grew. And then came something Naomi hadn't expected. A student approached her, a nervous young man in a Yale sweatshirt. "Hey, I just wanted to say, your second rebuttal. About power and enforcement. That was," he paused, rubbing his palms on his jeans. "That was the clearest I've ever heard anyone explain that issue. Like, ever. Naomi opened her eyes and smiled gently. Thank you. I mean, I'm studying international law, he continued. And that wasn't in any of our materials. Naomi just shrugged. Most of what matters isn't. Soon, more students came over. Not just Yale kids. Students from Dartmouth, Oxford, even a couple from Tokyo University. Some just said, thank you. Some asked how she learned to speak like that. One girl from NYU asked for her notes, only to realize Naomi had none. She had spoken from memory. And more impressively, from understanding. Somewhere in the background, the Princeton and Stanford teams watched all of this unfold. They weren't bitter. They weren't whispering anymore. They were quiet. Respectfully quiet. Because deep down, they knew what everyone else now realized. Naomi hadn't just held her own. She had changed the standard. 10 minutes turned into 15. Then 20. And still, the judges hadn't returned. The longer they stayed in that side room, the more obvious it became, the decision wasn't easy. Not because the debate scores were close, but because something had happened that didn't fit the usual formula. Naomi had bent the rules of style without ever breaking the rules of form. She had challenged the system using the very language it respected, but with a rhythm, presence, and power that no rubric could fully measure. And the judges were struggling with that. In the auditorium, the students who'd been crowding around Naomi finally dispersed when an usher asked everyone to return to their seats. Naomi stood and walked quietly back to the stage. She didn't look nervous. She looked like someone who already knew that whatever the outcome, she had done exactly what she came to do. As she stepped onto the platform, a professor from the judging panel walked past her, an older woman, with gray streaks in her tight bun and an expression that rarely changed. But just before Naomi passed, the woman paused, looked her directly in the eyes, and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't approval. It was recognition. Naomi gave the same small nod back. Then the head judge stepped forward to the podium. He looked around the auditorium. Cleared his throat. I'd like to thank all our finalists for a truly exceptional debate. In fact, he hesitated. A rare thing for a man who judged world championships. In many years of serving on panels like this, I've never seen a final round unfold quite like tonight's. He adjusted his glasses and unfolded the results slip. In third place, representing Stanford University, Raj Sethi and Lena Brooks. Applause. Respectful. Measured. In second place, representing Princeton University, Dylan Mercer and Ava Klein. Another round. Slightly louder. A pause. And in first place, representing the independent track. Naomi Fields. The auditorium didn't erupt. It froze. There was no dramatic cheering, no wild celebration. Just an audible gasp, and then, thunderous applause that rolled through the room like a wave that had been waiting to crash. People stood. Some students shouted her name. Naomi. Others just clapped in stunned silence, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. Naomi stepped forward. She accepted the small glass trophy without a speech. Without tears. She just smiled, small, calm, graceful. Like she'd already seen this moment long before it happened. And as she stood there, something else began to ripple through the crowd, questions. Quiet ones. Where did she come from? Who trained her? How did she learn to speak like that without a debate coach, a prep school, or a university name behind her? Those questions hung in the air like mist. But none of them were answered. Not yet. Naomi left the stage as quietly as she had entered it. But what no one realized, not yet, was that this debate was only the beginning of her story. Because Naomi hadn't just won a competition. She had forced one of the most prestigious intellectual spaces in the world to confront a truth it rarely acknowledged: genius doesn't always come with credentials. The crowd lingered long after the results were announced. Students who'd already posted congratulations online were refreshing their feeds, trying to find out more. But Naomi Fields wasn't on social media. No university profile, no published debates, no interviews. Just a name, and now, a reputation that had outpaced it overnight. By the time most of the finalists had taken photos, shaken hands, and slipped into small circles of alumni and coaches, Naomi was gone. She'd left the auditorium quietly, exiting through a side door near the back stairwell. One of the Yale event coordinators jogged after her and caught up just outside the building. "Wait, Miss Fields," the young woman called out, breathless. Naomi turned, smiling gently. The coordinator looked embarrassed. "Sorry. I wanted to ask. Do you have someone here? A coach? A team?" Naomi shook her head. "Nope. Just me." The girl blinked. "You mean, you really did all that alone?" Naomi didn't say anything at first. Then she asked, "Do you want the short version, or the long one?" "Both," the coordinator blurted out. Naomi chuckled. "The short version, life taught me how to argue. The long version? That takes a few years." She turned again, but the coordinator followed for one more question. "But, where did you even learn this stuff?" Naomi stopped walking. She looked up, almost like she was seeing a different place. A library no one used. A laptop with half a working screen. A bus ride that cost me 3 shifts at my job. And an old man at a community center who used to coach high schoolers before anyone remembered his name. The girl just stared. Naomi continued. "People think you have to be let into places like this. But sometimes, you walk in anyway." And with that, she disappeared into the cool night air. Across campus, word was spreading fast. Clips from the debate had already gone viral within the Yale student forums. One of the judges, a renowned ethics professor, posted a single sentence on her academic blog, "Tonight, I was reminded that brilliance often walks quietly." Back in a dorm room somewhere, a freshman who had been doubting whether they belonged in this world of polished suits and perfect diction watched Naomi's closing statement for the 4th time and whispered, she did it without anyone's permission. Naomi had become something more than a finalist. She had become proof. Proof that intelligence isn't confined to institutions. That understanding can grow in silence. That a person doesn't need to be granted a seat at the table if they know how to build one. And for Naomi, the win wasn't about recognition. It was about something else entirely, showing the next person like her that it was possible. In the days following the finals, Naomi's victory reverberated far beyond the auditorium walls. Emails from debate clubs across the country arrived in the event organizer's inbox. Students who had never heard of the independent track were now asking how to qualify. Many mentioned Naomi's name, describing her as an inspiration, proof that persistence and intellect could break through barriers. Meanwhile, the prestigious debate teams from top universities quietly reviewed their own training methods. Coaches debated how to better prepare their students, not just to win points, but to command presence and reframe arguments like Naomi had. At Yale, faculty members held informal discussions, calling for a rethink of the competition structure to better recognize independent talent. One of the judges, the ethics professor, invited Naomi for a private meeting. "I want to hear more about your approach," she said. "Your clarity, your command, it's rare. And much needed." Naomi smiled, accepting the invitation. For the first time, she felt an unexpected sense of belonging, not because of a title or affiliation, but because someone saw her ideas, not just her lack of a pedigree. But Naomi's path was far from conventional. She continued to juggle her part-time job, late-night studies, and a growing list of invitations to speak, always cautious about where she invested her time. "I don't want to be a novelty," she told a reporter one afternoon. "I want to be taken seriously. Not because I'm an exception, but because ideas should always be the focus." Her win wasn't just a personal achievement. It was a message, loud and clear, that intelligence, determination, and authenticity could disrupt even the most established arenas. And for those watching, Naomi Fields wasn't just a champion of the Yale Debate Finals. She was the beginning of a new conversation. Months had passed since the Yale Finals, but Naomi's story was still unfolding. Universities across the nation reached out, not with offers or scholarships, but with invitations, to speak, to mentor, to lead workshops that challenged traditional debate methods and encouraged independent thinkers. Naomi accepted a few, carefully choosing where her voice would be most effective. She also began working with grassroots programs in underrepresented communities, creating spaces where young people could find their own voices, voices unshaped by prestige or expectation. At Yale, the independent track grew in visibility and participation. The competition committee introduced new categories designed to level the playing field, inspired in large part by Naomi's performance. More importantly, the culture of debate began to shift. The spotlight wasn't just on credentials or affiliations anymore, it was on clarity, courage, and original thought. Naomi never sought the spotlight. She had walked into the Yale Finals quietly, carrying only a worn folder and a belief in herself. But she left something far bigger behind, a challenge to every institution, every competitor, and every student watching, to never underestimate the power of a voice prepared to speak the truth. And that challenge would echo far beyond the walls of any auditorium.